everybody, this is Eve West. Thank you for tuning into my YouTube channel. This channel is dedicated to promoting a book I wrote. It's called Follow. It's an ebook actually. You can find it on Amazon.com under the Kindles tab. If you're interested, I do have a link in the description of this video to actually purchase Follow. It's a book about spirituality and looking at it in a holistic way. When you think of a human being, you should think of us as a demigod, whereas we're spiritual, but we're also earthly. And so very seldom are we able to ground our divinity, if you will, and to embrace not just our spirituality, but also our the physical aspect of ourselves. And so in the book, I really look at the various constructs of the matrix and how they are designed to separate us, separate what we call the ego and the unconscious mind. Or it's, in Egyptian mythology, it's described as Isis and Ra, or in Christian theology, which is my programming, it's described as Adam and Eve, or whatever you want to call it, God and the devil. But anywho, I really talk about those various constructs and, and how the government, media, entertainment, education, the familial structure, the government structure itself, how it really aims to separate us and within ourselves. And I talk about the elite that actually run this, which I call a hellhole, if you will. That's why we greet each other with hello. But run this hellhole, if you will, for us, and actually, pretty much subject us to a lot of, if you will, torture. And having us fight ourselves, because we're really at war with ourselves within this false matrix environment. And so my last video really dealt a lot with the book of Numbers, and I really tried to paint a picture in the book of Numbers about the Lord and the profile of the Lord in the book of Numbers. When I grew up, my mom, when she took me to church, and every time I heard about her speak about God and about the Lord, it was this supernatural being that lived in the sky or something, and he always knew what you were doing, but he was a good God and he loved you and so forth. But when I actually read the text for myself, I really got another understanding, a very stark contrast to the type of descriptions that I was taught about God when I was younger. And so, we see in the book of Numbers that, God is telling Moses to number Israel, so he doesn't know the number. You would think God would impart that information to Moses, but he's asking Moses to count the people and, to gather an army. And so we know that, the Israelites don't have anything. They've come out of Egypt. They have been subjected to poor living conditions, which has subjected them to illness. They don't have food and water oftentimes. And so, as a result, they have to go out and conquer lands to get other people's stuff. And so it really paints a very parasitic picture of the Israelites in the book of Numbers especially. And so I really like to point out that, within this, the Bible, because we're always taught the Bible is a good book, but when you think about the Bible and how it was given to, or at least, it was told to slaves, they weren't able to read it. The masters could read a bit, but they couldn't read it. And that goes to show that the slaves were forbidden to read, because when you're reading something, it goes, it's within your, I guess what you would call your frontal cortex. You're able to actually decipher information better that way. But when someone is telling you information, it goes past your frontal cortex into your temporal lobe, where, many things get lost in translation. And so the information is still there, but it's lodged in your subconscious, and that's what the slave masters wanted to do actually with the slaves. When it comes to the Bible. But we have this Bible, and it's used in many different facets of our, societal construct, one of which is in the court system. When we are, like, if we're a witness or something like that in the court system, we take our hand and we put it on the Bible. And so, people are brought to justice in our court systems for things such as, stealing and trespassing and murder and stuff like that. But we see this Lord in the book of Numbers actually advocates trespassing and he advocates stealing and murder. So, when I was reading these things, I said to myself, this is a great contradiction. But just like all other constructs of the matrix, religion and the Bible itself actually is designed to create psychological splits within the mind, to put you at war with yourself. And so, just going back to some of the scriptures that I talked about in the last video, whereas Numbers 13:17 through 33, where it says, "And Moses sent them to spy out the land of Canaan, and said unto them, Get you up this way southward, and go up into the mountain, and see the land, what it is, and the people that dwelleth therein, whether they be strong or weak, few or many, and what the land is that they dwell in, whether it be good or bad, and what cities they be that they dwell in, whether in tents or in strongholds, and what the land is, whether it be fat or lean, whether there be wood therein or not. And be ye of good courage, and bring the fruit of the land." Now the time was the time of the first ripe grapes. And so we see that, because the Israelites don't have anything, they go into these lands and spy them out. So, it's kind of interesting. If these lands were theirs, or the Lord's to be given to the Israelites as an inheritance, like it says, then you wouldn't have to spy it out, and there wouldn't even be people on the land. But they actually have to go and size up these people and take their stuff. And so word gets around, if you will, that the Israelites are going about and preying upon the land and so forth. Numbers 32:39 says, "And the children of," I think it's Machir, the son of Manasseh, went to Gilead and took it and dispossessed the Amorite which was in it. And so here we see Israelites are going and dispossessing lands from people. So, if the Lord's giving you something, why is it that you're dispossessing people's lands? You're taking it from them for yourself. And so, when we look at stuff like this, we look at scripture like this is stealing, this is trespassing, this is stealing. But in a court of law, if you trespass and if you steal, you go to jail. And so when you look at the Israelites and how, the people that run our false matrix society are descendants of the Israelites, it's very hypocritical to bring people to justice for stealing and trespassing and, killing and stuff like that, when you actually are guilty. You are literally guilty of those things. It doesn't really make any sense to me, but but I suppose it makes sense to them. In Numbers 31, it talks about how the Lord sends the Israelites in to avenge the children of Israel against the Midianites. And there's a place in the text that talks about how the Israelites committed whoredoms or what have you with the Midianite women and so forth. But really, we see here that the Lord is ordaining genocide, because he's ordaining the killing of the males, the killing of the male children, and keeping the women children who have not slept with men, keeping them alive for the Israelites themselves, and really grouping the people that they capture in Midian with all of the other goods or whatever, or spoils, such as cattle and so forth. And so it really paints a very menacing picture of this Lord in the Israelites who actually follow him. It says, "And they warred against the Midianites as the Lord commanded Moses, and they slew all the males." And so, clearly this is genocide, killing all the males. If you look at the 9th verse, that was the verse 7 that I read, Numbers 31 verse 7. But Numbers 31 verse 9 says that the children of Israel took all the women of Midian captive and their little ones, and took the spoil of all their cattle and all their flock and all their goods. And so, here they're stealing all of the people's stuff. What justification is that? Let's say even if the Lord said, you know what, you caused the men of Israel to commit whoredoms with you. Let's say you caused that. And so, would that be, I guess what you would call retribution, taking all of your stuff and killing all of the men in your town, and killing the children? And, is that what you would call, reciprocity or whatever? When you look at it, you analyze it, it doesn't make any sense in terms of, the rationale of this Lord. He doesn't seem like a very rational person. But it says in Numbers 31:17, now therefore kill every male among the little ones, so that's killing kids, and kill every woman that hath known man by lying with him, but all the women children that have not known a man by lying with him, keep alive for yourselves. And so why would you keep the women children that have not known a man alive for yourselves? To me, it doesn't make any sense. But we see, when they collect the spoils of things, that they group the people in with the spoils. It says in Moses and Eleazar, the priest did as the Lord commanded Moses, and the booty, being the rest of the prey which the men of war had caught, was 600,000 and 70,000 and 5,000 sheep, and 12,000 beeves, and 1,000 asses, and 32,000 persons in all of women that had not known man by lying with him. And the half which was the portion of them that went out to war was in number 300,000 and 30,000 and 500. So here, they're grouping the people with, asses and with, sheep and stuff like that. So, it really goes to show that there's really no humanity when it comes to this. They're really treating the people like they're objects. They're not really treating the people like they're people. And so, I really want to point out that, when you look at this from a rational point of view, not religious, because you have religious fanatics and, they're like, oh, no matter how insane this stuff sounds, they'll say it's the Lord God, and, because it's the Lord, it's acceptable. But when you're killing little children, and stealing people's lands and, taking the spoils of their land, to me, it's really, you really can't, say, you can't justify, I should say. You can't really justify it. And so when you go to a court of law and, and someone, is trespassing or stealing or killing kids or what have you, and you tell them to put your hand on this Bible, the person could say, well, the Lord, had kids killed and trespassed and stole people's stuff. So how is it that, you're bringing me to justice about something that is advocated by the Lord, by God, which is, correlates to your church as a place of piety and righteousness per se. There's clearly contradictions here. And so I wanted to point out in Numbers 31 as well, verse 30, how the Lord sends the Israelites to capture the land of Sion. And so, when we look at that, we see the Lord hardens the heart of King Heshbon, which is the king of Sion. And he hardens his heart so to give justification for the Israelites to go and take the land of Sion. And so we see here that this particular Lord is interfering with free will so he can take the land from one king and give it to his people. It doesn't make any sense. And so it says right here in verse 30, from Numbers 31, verse 30, but Sihon, king of Heshbon, would not let us pass by him, for the Lord thy God hardened his spirit, and made his heart obstinate, that he might deliver him into thy hand, as appeareth this day. And so, we see this, Lord hardening Pharaoh's heart in the book of Exodus, to prevent the children of Israel from, from leaving. if you will, so he can flex in front of Pharaoh and demonstrate his wonders and so forth. And so we see the same type of thing where, the Lord is interfering with free will, so he can he can give justification for things and doing things that he wants to do that really doesn't keep the peace, but breeds it just breeds separation and war and injustice, really, if you think about it. So I just wanted to point that out, and how they just go around conquering and possessing other people's territories because they don't have anything. I wanted to point out that this Lord, and I've talked about this in terms of Leviticus too, this Lord is very materialistic. When you think about the material, you think of the Greek god Saturn, right? And Saturn is allegorically depicted as Satan in the Bible. And so really it's very, very easy to correlate this Lord with Satan, because he's very materialistic, and he wants the materials and offerings from the people in a certain type of way. And so I was always taught as a little girl that the Lord doesn't care about pleasure. The Lord doesn't care about all these different things. He's a good God, and he wants to he's just rules, but he doesn't care about gratification the way that human beings do. But we see that he definitely does. And so when we look at Deuteronomy 8:18, and we see scriptures such as, "But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that giveth thee power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he sware unto thy fathers, as it is this day." And so here you think to yourself, well, why is the Lord, giving power to have wealth to establish a covenant? And we've read scriptures such as Matthew 19:24, "And again I say unto you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into the kingdom of God." So, if a rich man can't enter into the kingdom of God, why does it say in Deuteronomy 8:18 that to establish a covenant with God, that God gives you wealth? So it doesn't really make any sense, and it goes along with another video I did about contradictions in the Bible. And the Bible purposely places contradictions in it to divide Adam and Eve, if you will. So Freemason masters, they use this text to create either the white part of the checkerboard floor, which is the angel, or the black part, which is the demon. And so when I was growing up, I was programmed with scriptures that would reflect the white part of the checkerboard floor of Freemasonry. So I just wanted to to point that out, and point out the contradiction there. But when we get away from the book of Numbers and we get into Deuteronomy, we really see how this Lord is trying to instill fear into the people. This whole matrix construct is really run by fear. We don't say the things we want to say, or we don't do the things we want to do. We don't feel the way, or we deny our feelings, and try not to feel the way that we want to feel or we need to feel, because we're just not allowed. You can't speak to your boss the way you want to, or you can't speak to your parents the way you want to, or you can't speak to the police the way that you want to, or what have you, because when you share your real true feelings, then you're ostracized and you're reprimanded. And it really forces you to solidifies the ego, and it builds up what we call archon energy in your unconscious mind. And so people don't really realize, but at the end of your incarnation, you meet that that archon energy that you bottled up, that you weren't able to share within the restriction of the environment. And so I'm gonna share another video with you that really focuses on that masculine archon energy that you have to conceal, and that you build up throughout your incarnation. And it's referred to as the Kundalini. I don't really like to refer to it as that, because This energy actually corresponds to your melanin. Soul corresponds to your melanin. Like if you say that's a soul sister or a soul brother, oftentimes people associate a soul sister or a soul brother with a black person, and everyone on this planet has been black at some point. That's why it says everyone's ancestors is black. But as you reincarnate, you get your melanin extracted out until eventually you become a master race. You don't have a functioning third eye. But the darker you are, the more you're targeted in the matrix, because you have the capacity or the ability with the pineal gland to see past the constructs of the matrix that divide the ego and the unconscious mind. And so the demographic of darker people is targeted more than any other demographic, because darker people have more godlike capabilities. And I'm not saying that to say somebody's better than somebody else. I'm not saying that. What I'm saying is that once your melanin is extracted out to a certain point, you have more of a calcified pineal gland. And so you function much better within the matrix construct, with the information that's disseminated or given to you, but you don't have any insight. You don't have very much insight going into another dimension to be able to get beyond the physical dimension when it comes to a spiritual context. And so, we see in Deuteronomy that fear is definitely infused. And, this Lord wants the people to fear him. And so we see this is how he maintains control. This is how he maintains control of the people. And so, for example, in Deuteronomy 11:26-28, it says, "Behold, I set before you this day a blessing and a curse. A blessing, if ye obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I command you this day, and a curse, if ye will not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn aside out of the way which I command you this day, to go after other gods which ye have not known." And so, when you look at scripture like this, and there's riddled throughout Deuteronomy, and many people do associate the book of Deuteronomy with slavery, and I can see why, because, when you're talking about free will, excuse me, when you're talking about free will, you think to yourself, what is free will? Typically when you, excuse me guys, typically when you talk about free will and you think about, what is free will? You ask yourself, what is that? Free will is choice. You have a choice, if you will. You can choose if you want to do something, or, if you want something, what have you. But when someone is saying that they're going to curse you if you do not follow these commandments, did you really have a choice in following them? And so when I looked at the whole concept of free will, I really started, recollecting about, throughout my life, do I really have free will within the matrix? I'm looking at the various constructs. And so, for example, like religion, when I was growing up, my mom took me to church, and, I really did never like church, and now I can see in hindsight why. But, church was, from an unconscious standpoint, I could see why. Because the unconscious mind knows that these religions are made by Freemason handlers or masters. They call themselves ascended masters. But I didn't have a choice. If I did not go to church, I would be beaten and, punished and reprimanded. So I did not have free will in terms of being programmed with scripture. And so, when you look at that, and you look at the various constructs of the matrix, such as the familial structure, such as, religion and so forth, you see that really when you're born into hell, that's why we say, hello, this is hell. So when you're born into this prison system, or you're born into hell, you do not have free will. You're just programmed. So as the ego, you have no choice, if you will, but to listen and to do what your handlers, such as, your parents and your teachers and, the police and your boss at work, your earthly masters, you don't really have any choice in terms of what you would want to do. But the makers of this world, who created Deuteronomy and the Bible itself, they always want to convince you that you have free will. And so that's like, I guess what you would say, the people that run this hellhole and who try to bestow the idea that you have free will are lunatics. They are lunatics. It's like, for example, say you were crossing the street And so when you crossed the street, you saw a car coming, and so you ran across the street to prevent the car from hitting you. Let's say that. So, you're crossing the street, you saw a car, darting down the road all of a sudden, and so you ran across. And so, if that scenario was being discussed with the Freemason handlers that created this false matrix reality, they would tell you that that was free will, that you chose to run across the street. That's, you made a choice to, run across the street and to save your life. But think to yourself, from a psychological standpoint, is that a choice? Is that a choice? And really, it's not a choice, because you think to yourself, when you examine your reptilian brain, your reptilian brain says, you know what, if I don't run across the street, or if I don't back up or something like that, then I'm going to get hit by this car. And so this is what we call the reason why, you ran across the street. It was not necessarily a conscious choice, because you knew if you did not get out of the way of that car, that you would have gotten hit. And if you had gotten hit, then you would have gotten killed, and so forth. So, the thing is that things that you would consider to be like normal, such as running across the street so you won't get hit by a car, is not free will, essentially, due to the matrix environment. And so just to kind of use that example with many other things and other so-called choices that we make within the matrix, is not free will, because they have set it up to where you will always make a decision that goes along with your survival, with your reptilian brain, trying to protect yourself and so forth. So they're very evil. And they're very crafty, if you will. They're lawyers in a courtroom. And so one thing about lawyers, many lawyers are liars. And so they always find a way to, within the law, to convict you, And so when you start to wake up in the matrix, especially, and you actually read the Bible, and you actually look at, all of the monotheistic religions that they created, and the systems, and how the systems that they created, like the educational system and so forth, how they're all bogus, you really start to experience affliction, crucifixion, as I call it. And you're really targeted as a divergent, because you're not really accepting the program anymore. And so when you're not accepting the program, people who are bound by the matrix environment are really designed to get rid of you. And so you will start to have issues within your home. You'll start to have issues, within your, your job. You'll start to have issues just with anybody who's bound by the system, because the system is designed to not accept divergence, not accept people who have knowledge and who can see past the constructs. And so when your melanin is activated, then it becomes an issue, and you experience what we call restriction. And this kind of goes into the mark of the beast as well. They say don't accept the mark of the beast. But when you accept the mark of the beast, you're marrying desire, you're marrying your unconscious mind, which puppeteers your ego. And so really in a nutshell, you're marrying the devil, the veil of the ego, which is the unconscious mind. And so you're supposed to be dumb and stupid here. That's why, when you have a birthday, they have candles on your cake. And so people never wonder, why do I blow out candles on my cake? You blow out your candles on your cake because when you descend into hell, you have amnesia and you blow out your knowledge. And so when you blow out your knowledge, your melanin is taken away, which is connected to your pineal gland. And so you really don't know anything. You come into this reality without the understanding that all of these religions are false and bogus. Jesus could not have been named Jesus, since the letter J did not exist during the time that he would have walked the earth. So for example, if I was born back into the matrix Christian, and I had this knowledge, when I was born back into the matrix, I would go to church and knowing that, Jesus is not real and it's a made up thing. It's one of those characters that they made up from Greek mythology, because Jesus is pronounced Jesus in Spanish. It's Zeus. So much of the Bible is based in Greek mythology, which was based in Egyptian mythology. So, you really, if you have knowledge coming into this system, then you would be able to ascend. But when you don't have knowledge and you get all your knowledge toward the end, like me, like how I'm getting, that's why they're called the Illuminati. They're sick because they illuminate you to really invoke fear within you. But when you get this information towards the end, it is very hurtful and it produces a lot of suffering and loose energy. And so, I just wanted to point out the whole idea of free will and really getting into that and focusing on that as you look at Deuteronomy itself. For example, Deuteronomy 12:10 through 11. It says, "And then there shall be a place which the Lord your God shall choose to cause his name to dwell there. Thither shall ye bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings and your sacrifices, your tithes, and the heave offering of your hand, and all your choice vows, which ye vow unto the Lord. And ye shall rejoice before the Lord your God, ye, and your sons and your daughters, and your men servants, and your maid servants, and the Levite that is within your gate, for as so much as he have no part nor inheritance with you." So really it's showing here that, after they conquer these lands, we talk about mainly in Numbers, how, they're giving this stuff to the Lord, burnt offerings, sacrifices, tithes, heave offerings. And so, really it paints a picture of this Lord again, how he's using these people to get stuff for him. You don't really see the Lord really giving the people much of anything, other than to keep them clean and healing them, I guess, so he can, use them in the army to go conquer these territories. But the Israelites aren't having fun. I thought they were supposed to be brought out of Egypt to not experience bondage, but they're not having fun. If they do have fun, they definitely get punished for it. So this Lord clearly stole ancient knowledge from going back to Exodus, and he could do the same things that the Egyptian magicians could do, but he does not have a balance between his pineal gland and his pituitary gland. He's willful, right? And so selfish. And so he has a sense of self, but he does not have a sense of love and really going past who he is, if you will, to really make sure that the people are taken care of. And so that's why the people oftentimes are cursed when they tell him they want to go back to Egypt, because in Egypt they were taken care of more so than with this particular Lord, who forces them into another, a more, I would say, severe type of servitude or slavery, basically. And so it's all about fear. In Deuteronomy 13:14 it says, "Ye shall walk with the Lord your God and fear him, and keep his commandments and obey his voice, and ye shall serve him and cleave unto him." And so, it's it's really, really interesting to see how, fear is really invoked with them. Like, for example, in Deuteronomy 13:7, there's a man, I'm not going to read through it, but, it talks about how there's a man who was put to death for gathering sticks. He was put to death for gathering sticks, I believe. And, the people, they stoned him, if you will, because he didn't keep the Sabbath. And so, it says, "But thou shalt surely kill him, thine hand shall be first upon him to put him to death, and afterward the hand of all the people." And so, I believe this is the one that talks about the man that gathered the sticks. But it goes to show, psychological things that were, really bestowed upon the people to, I guess you would say, keep them in check and to keep them working. So you think to yourself, right, the Sabbath. So the Sabbath day is what, Saturday at this point? And so it's like, well, you work 6 days, and on the 7th day you rest. And so what if the Lord worked you 7 days straight, every day without a break? Just think about that psychologically. If you had to work every single day, you would probably get pissed. And you would get probably so pissed that you would retaliate against your earthly master. you would retaliate. You would say, I'm not working for you anymore. And maybe you, as the people, would rise up against your master. But if your master works you for 6 days straight and then says you can have a day off, then psychologically that makes you look forward to that day, right, as you're working. And and then you're a little bit refreshed to go back to work. So the masters of this particular construct really understand this notion. They understand the psychological implications of giving you a break, but they know that if they don't give you a break, that you will your kundalini, or your earthly sacral aspect of you, will rise, and it will actually break away from the system instead of accepting the system, if you will. So that's why the Sabbath was so important, and why he wanted people to keep the Sabbath so much, and why he had this man who was gathering the sticks stoned. It's just very interesting. One of the major topics that I wanted to talk about was tithing. Tithing was always a big thing. When I got married to my ex-husband, when I started to go to Baptist churches, I really started to hear the significance of tithing. And, I heard that tithing was giving you 10% of your income, total income, to the church. And, many churches, they advocate that you write it off on your taxes, whatever the case is. But it's important to tithe and bring a certain amount of money into the congregation, for missionary work, and to keep up the building, and to pay the employees and so forth. And so superficially, I think that, that's fine. But if you think about it from a common sense, metaphysical, feminine, metaphysical perspective, the church is supposed to be the Lord's house, right? Well, since the church is the Lord's house and he wants to save souls, and the Lord is in control of everything, why would he need money to keep up his establishment, to keep up his house? Why? He's supernatural, he's all powerful, but he needs money. And so, this doesn't really make any common sense, if you will, when you think about it in a very rational way. It makes no common sense to have to have tithes, and if you don't have the tithes of the people, then you can't keep up the church. Really, the church will suffer if you don't have the money of the people. And so you think to yourself, well, who would God be without the people? It's like it's like this God needs people to worship him and be in awe of him and fear him. But if the people decided not to, then who would he be? And so it really kind of takes away that whole conditioning that we had about God and who God really is, and to see that this God or this Lord is not anything, is not who we know him to be. So when it starts talking about tithes in the Bible, it it's very interesting. And here I did not note, for some reason, I did not note the actual scripture here, but it starts with verse 22. I'll find the chapter and clarify, but it says that thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed that the field bringeth forth year by year. And thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose to place his name there, the tithe of thy corn, of thy wine, and of thine oil, and the firstlings of thy herds and of thy flocks, that thou mayest learn to fear the Lord thy God always. And if the way be too long for thee, so that thou art not able to carry it, or if the place be too far from thee, which the Lord thy God shall choose to set his name there, when the Lord thy God hath blessed thee, then shalt thou turn it into money, and bind up the money in thine hand, and shalt go unto the place which the Lord thy God shall choose. And thou shalt bestow that money for whatsoever thy soul lusteth after, for oxen, or for sheep, or for wine, or for strong drink, or for whatsoever thy soul desireth, and thou shalt eat there before the Lord thy God, and thou shalt rejoice, thou and thine household. And the Levite that is within thy gate, thou shalt not forsake him, for he hath no part nor inheritance with thee. At the end of 3 years thou shalt bring forth all the tithe of thine increase the same year, and shalt lay it up within thy gates. And the Levite, because he hath no part nor inheritance with thee, and the stranger, and the fatherless, and the widow, which are within thy gate, shall come and shall eat and be satisfied, and the Lord thy God may bless thee in all the work of thine hand which thou doest. And so when you see the word tithe, you see 10%. A tithe is 10%. And so when you see that it says, thou shalt truly tithe all the increase of thy seed, and the field bringeth forth year by year. And it says, and thou shalt eat before the Lord thy God in the place, and so forth. So really it's saying that, your tithe is what you get. Your tithe is what you're getting. And in the midst of what you're getting, you're going to have to take care of the Levites and the fatherless and the widows and so forth. And so that means that 90% of the money is going to the priest and to the Lord, whereas only 10% is going to you. So the way that it talks about tithing in the Bible is different than how we see tithing. We see tithing, I've been conditioned to see tithing as you're giving 10%. But here in the Bible is saying that you are taking 10%, and whatever you take, in the 10% that you do take, you have to take care of these people who can't take care of themselves, like the Levites. And so you think to yourself, well, given how the Lord wants all these different sin offerings for your menstrual period, or having, children, or being sick, and how he wants, lambs without blemish and stuff like that, you think to yourself, okay, well, what are the priests doing with the money? What are they doing with the money? Why aren't they taking something out of that 90% and helping the widows and the fatherless, and so forth? And so, you really get the idea that these are backwards priests, and it goes back to that movie Eyes Wide Shut, and how, which is an occult movie. It explores the occult behind our false matrix environment and the elite that run it. And so in Backwards Priest, on that song that's played at the little ritual, whatever, the satanic ritual, it talks about the separation, or it symbolizes, the separation of Adam and Eve, because you hear 3 voices chanting. You hear the voice of the feminine, the voice of the masculine, and then the morphic voice of Satan, or Saturn, if you will, which is separating the two from becoming union, from finding union with one another. So, really you get the understanding that these are backwards priests. These are backwards priests, and this Lord actually is at the apex of these priests, if you will. And they're really just using the people and getting stuff from the people, and really standing on their backs, really standing on their backs. So I wanted to point that out here in Deuteronomy, and also to point out certain little things I saw, like usury. Like a usury is where you're charging abnormally high interest, if you will. And so this Lord says in Deuteronomy 23:19-20, thou shalt not lend upon usury to thy brother, usury of money, usury of victuals, usury of anything that is lent upon usury. Unto a stranger thou mayest lend upon usury, but unto thy brother thou shalt not lend upon usury, that the Lord thy God may bless thee in all that thou settest thine hand to in the land whither thou goest to possess it. So here it's saying to a stranger, to a foreigner, you can charge them high interest. But to your brother, to a fellow Israelite, you should not charge them high interest. What is that really saying? I was taught that, when I was a little girl, I was taught that the Lord was all-inclusive. And I was taught that we're all children of God. It doesn't matter what nationality we are, or what gender, what age, or what have you. There are no divisions when it comes to the Lord. But here the Lord is saying, listen, if some people come into your land, charge them, you can charge them super duper interest. Clearly, this is not the supernatural Lord that we were taught, if you will. And so, I really, really just, wanted to point out some things here. Whereas, the Lord is, is not the figure that we have been told that he is. And so that's why there's a difference between reading the Bible and listening to the Bible and having someone give you information in the Bible, as opposed to you, really looking at it for yourself and deciphering it for yourself and really using your common sense, if you will. And so in Deuteronomy 28 especially, it has a whole lot of things in there that really invoke fear. Especially when it talks about how, if you're not listening to what the Lord is telling you, then the Lord will cause somebody to sleep with your wife. Like, I thought that was really crazy. When I saw certain things like that, like the Lord has the commandment, thou shalt not commit adultery. But if you're looking at, when you look at Deuteronomy, you see that the Lord sounds like a crazy, sadistic psychopath in saying that, all of these various curses will fall upon you if you do not listen to what he tells you to do. And so, and I did have a few examples. Let's see. Yeah, one of them was interesting, which just kind of blew me away. In addition to the one where it says, I'll cause another man to lay with your wife. It was Deuteronomy 28:53 through 57. Where it says, and thou shalt eat the fruit of thine own body, the fruit of thy sons and thy daughters, which the Lord thy God hath given thee, in the siege and in the straitness wherewith thine enemies shall distress thee. And looking at the NIV, it says, because of the suffering of your enemy will afflict on you during the siege, you will eat the fruit of the womb, the flesh of the sons and daughters the Lord your God hath given you. So the Lord is like, if you don't listen to my commandments and do what I tell you to do, I'm going to have you eat your children and resort to cannibalism. That was left out, when I was in church. How the Lord said he's going to make you eat your kids. I really just don't understand. Maybe somebody can help me, really understand a lot of these things that, the Lord is telling people to do, or not just telling people to do, but telling what will happen to them if they do not do them. How do you say, well, if you don't listen to me and follow my commandments, I'll have someone lay with your wife and have somebody eat your kids? I think it's Deuteronomy 28:30 that he talks about, where he will have somebody, he will have another man to lay with your wife. And so, I really, and looking at these scriptures is very disheartening, and it causes a whole lot of pain and suffering. It causes a lot of pain and suffering because you realize that the things that you were programmed to believe are not the way that things are. And so when you wake up in the matrix, you start to read the Bible as a master, as opposed to as a master would read it, or understand it at least, as opposed to how a slave would. And so when you're taught as a kid that, this is the good book and this is the book of the Lord and church is awesome and this, that, and the other, and then you find out this information, it's very difficult, and it creates a psychological split. And so this is crucifixion. They call it the awakening in New Age, but really it's crucifixion. And so, the part of you that believes in God and believes in Jesus and was conditioned to think of this book as good is actually in conflict with the part of you that knows that this book is bogus and that this is Greek mythology, derived from Egyptian mythology. And, these stories are pretty much made up. You know, they're not true. Like if you look at, I think it's the last chapter in the book of Deuteronomy, it talks about how many days that the Israelites mourn the death of Moses, but they don't know where he was buried. That doesn't make any sense. You know how many days somebody cried for someone, but you don't know where his coffin is. That doesn't make any sense. You know, I mean, a burial site is stationary, right? You always know where that's at, but you know, you have to pass down word of mouth how many days someone mourned someone. So, you know, it really definitely goes to show how, you know, these stories are bogus and they're really used to inflict to embellish the psychological mind and to inflict pain and suffering, psychological pain and suffering upon slaves, upon people who have a slave mentality, so the people who created this stuff can stay in power. So, you know, thanks guys, you know, for watching you know, this little series of books, or series of videos for the first 5 books of the Bible. And so my next video, I'll be talking about the Kundalini and how that relates to fear and psychology and monarch programming, such as the Bible and religion. Thanks guys for watching.